The sky over King's Landing was a canvas of smoke and ember. Flames licked the battlements, their golden tongues reflecting in the shattered streets below. A crown, twisted and scarred, gleamed beneath storm clouds, a silent witness to the betrayal that had set the realm aflame. The roar of dragons shattered the night, their wings blotting out stars as if the heavens themselves recoiled from the violence below. In the shadowed halls of the Red Keep, whispers carried like poisoned winds. "The dragon's seed will claim what is theirs," murmured one, while another swore vengeance with clenched fists. Blood had been spilled, oaths broken, and the fragile balance of power tipped into chaos. From the distant heights of Dragonstone to the ashes of Harrenhal, the realm trembled under the weight of prophecy and ambition. Among the chaos, a single figure stood, eyes blazing with fire and sorrow. A queen not yet crowned, yet already feared and loathed. She contemplated the cost of her claim. Every heartbeat echoed with the knowledge that every ally could betray, every sword could turn, and every dragon's fire could consume even the blood of its kin. Thus began the Dance of Dragons, a war of fire and blood, a tragedy written in scales and steel, and a tale that would haunt Westeros for generations to come. The wind howled across the blackened battlements of Dragonstone, carrying with it the salt and chill of the narrow sea. Waves crashed against jagged cliffs, sending spray skyward, as if the ocean itself sought to warn those who dwelled within the ancient fortress of fire and stone. It was here, amidst the carved dragon motifs and endless corridors of echoing stone, that Rhaenyra Targaryen first understood the weight of her bloodline. The Targaryens were a house born of flame, descended from dragons, and yet no birthright could shield her from the schemes of men. From the moment of her naming, whispers had followed her like shadows. "The dragon seed will claim what is theirs," old maesters muttered, turning brittle pages beneath flickering candlelight. The prophecy was never spoken in full, never written aloud, for fear that words themselves might summon fate. Yet its meaning was clear to all who listened with fear or desire. Fire would consume the throne, and blood would mark its inheritance. Rhaenyra learned to walk the corridors of Dragonstone with measured steps, her small hands tracing the sigils carved into the stone, feeling the pulse of generations that had preceded her. Her father, King Viserys Targaryen, ruled with the steady patience of a man aware that time, more than force decided kings. In the grand halls, tapestries told the story of his ancestors, Aegon the Conqueror, Balerion's shadow across a trembling realm, and the countless dragons that had soared and fallen. Viserys' love for his daughter was profound yet guarded. He saw in Rhaenyra not only the fire of her dragon blood, but the tempest it could unleash if unchecked. At night he would sit beside her in the candlelit solar, recounting tales of dragons and kings, of victories and mistakes, and though his voice was gentle, it carried the weight of warning. Power demanded sacrifice, and the throne was never without peril. Rhaenyra's mother, the queen of soft hands and sharper wit, offered counsel woven with affection and calculation. "The court is a serpent's nest," she whispered once as Rhaenyra traced a model of Dragonstone's towers, "and each smile hides teeth. Learn the language of whispers before you raise your voice." It was a lesson both subtle and brutal. Kindness could be weaponized, loyalty could be bought and broken, and love could be the most dangerous snare of all. The princess absorbed these lessons like parched soil drinks rain, understanding that to survive was not merely to live but to command, to bend circumstance to will, and to anticipate betrayal long before it arrived. Among the shadows of the Red Keep and Dragonstone alike, court intrigues simmered. Princes and princesses, lords and ladies, knights and maesters, all played a game in which the stakes were life, death, and legacy. Her half-brother Aegon, the seed of her father's second union, was a boy whose innocence belied ambition already flickering in his gaze. Courtiers whispered of his temperament, of the subtle charm he wielded like a weapon, of his destiny as a rival who would one day challenge her claim. Rhaenyra felt the first prickling of unease. Family, she realized, could be the most perilous opponent of all. The dragons, sleeping and coiled within stone halls and hidden caves, were more than beasts. They were extensions of the Targaryen soul. Their scales glimmered like molten metal in torchlight, and their eyes reflected a wisdom ancient beyond comprehension. Rhaenyra would spend hours watching her hatchlings, learning the rhythm of their breaths, the flare of their nostrils, and the sway of their tails. To command them required patience and authority, and she sensed that the dragons, like the throne, would never bow to mere desire. They demanded respect, understanding, and fear. On stormy nights, when lightning split the sky over Dragonstone, the young princess would wander to the highest tower and gaze into the darkened waters below. She pondered the words of the prophecy, the shape of her destiny, and the shadow her choices might cast across the realm. The wind carried with it voices of the past, of ancestors who had risen and fallen, of dragons who had burned and died. Rhaenyra felt the enormity of it pressing upon her, an inheritance of fire and blood that demanded courage, cunning, and at times, cruelty. The court, meanwhile, continued its quiet, relentless plotting. Old lords who had served Viserys' father eyed the young princess with suspicion. Advisors whispered of alliances, of hidden marriages, and of pacts forged in secrecy. Every smile at the royal table carried a double meaning. Every gift held the potential for poison. Rhaenyra learned early that a queen's strength was not measured by the warmth of her companions, but by her capacity to see the danger before it struck, to act before the blade was at her throat. And in that, the lessons of her childhood were both harsh and necessary. To rule, one must master not only dragons and men, but the unpredictable currents of human desire and fear. Yet even as the weight of prophecy pressed upon her, Rhaenyra discovered moments of tenderness. In the quiet hours, her mother's hand rested on hers, offering reassurance. The dragons, huddled in their nests, offered companionship unlike any human friend. And in the depths of her own heart, the princess felt the first stirrings of defiance. A fire that would not be tamed, a will that would not bow, a destiny that would not be denied. It was a fragile flame nurtured in secrecy, destined to ignite a war that would sear the world. In the halls of Dragonstone, under storm and shadow, Rhaenyra Targaryen took her first steps toward power. The prophecy whispered around her like wind through the towers. Fire and blood would consume the throne, and the dragon who bore the weight of the crown would be remembered in legend, in sorrow, and in ashes. The princess was young, yet the embers of ambition glimmered in her gaze, and those who watched carefully could already see the shape of a queen in waiting, fierce, cunning, and unyielding. The dance of dragons had not yet begun, but its rhythm pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the shadows, and in that pulse lay both promise and doom, waiting patiently for the fire to rise. The sun had barely pierced the horizon when Dragonstone awoke to the echoing beat of hooves and the distant roar of dragons. Rhaenyra Targaryen, now a young woman of formidable presence, moved through her halls with purpose. Every gesture, every glance carried the weight of expectation and the hunger of ambition. The court had changed. Courtiers who once whispered behind fans and folded hands now bowed in careful calculation. Allies sought her favor, rivals tested her patience, and spies slipped unnoticed through shadowed corridors. The game of power had begun, and Rhaenyra had learned its rules well: subtlety, calculation, and the judicious wielding of fear. Her dragons had grown with her, their scales glinting like molten bronze under the sun, their wings darkening the sky when they took flight. To command them was to command the essence of the Targaryen line itself, and she wielded their power with a measured hand. She rode Syrax across the cliffs, the wind tearing through her hair, and felt a thrill unlike any other. Dominion not only over beasts but over destiny. Every beat of Syrax's wings carried the unspoken message to her enemies. The Dragon Queen was rising. The red keep of King's Landing loomed across the narrow sea, a distant symbol of both opportunity and threat. Letters arrived from loyal lords pledging support or subtly testing her will. In candlelit chambers she pored over maps, charts of troop movements, and letters smudged with ink and sweat. Strategy was a language she spoke fluently. She read ambition like an open scroll, decoding lies and flattery alike. Her advisors, chosen for both loyalty and intellect, became instruments of her influence, shaping alliances that would later define the tides of war. Yet ambition was never without cost. Her half-brother Aegon, the boy who had once played at her side, now regarded her with eyes sharpened by rivalry. The court whispered that he would one day contest her claim, and though she met his gaze with calm authority, Rhaenyra could feel the tension beneath the surface, a current of rivalry that promised strife. Their mother's counsel haunted her. Even kin can carry daggers unseen. Every smile exchanged at council was a test. Every gift a challenge. Trust was a currency she could not afford to spend lightly. Marriage alliances and clandestine pacts became the tools of her ascension. Lords and ladies courted her favor, offering loyalty with one hand and plotting betrayal with the other. She weighed their intentions carefully, smiling when required but letting her thoughts remain impenetrable. At night the dragons roared from their perches, their voices echoing across the cliffs like distant thunder. They were her army, her shield, and at times her conscience, reflecting back the fiery determination in her heart. Her ambition extended beyond mere survival. She envisioned a realm united under her rule, a court that respected her lineage and feared her power. She met with emissaries from the Stormlands and the Vale, her presence radiating authority. The dragon's heir is not a child to be disregarded, she told them in low, deliberate tones. Every word, every gesture was calculated to cement her reputation. A queen in all but name, yet commanding loyalty with the weight of dragons and destiny. Amid her rise, love and loyalty intertwined with ambition. Sir Criston Cole, once a sworn knight to her father, now served with quiet devotion. His presence was both shield and temptation, offering companionship in a court rife with treachery. Rhaenyra allowed herself fleeting moments of vulnerability, brief flashes where she could be a young woman, not only a dragon queen in waiting. Yet the fire within her refused to be tamed. She understood that affection could be a weakness in the midst of power. Trust was measured in survival, not sentiment. The first hints of rebellion stirred across the narrow sea. Lannisters in the Yeo West, Valerians in the east, and various houses of the Stormlands watched her with cautious curiosity. Some sent envoys to test her resolve, others plotted behind locked doors. She anticipated these movements, countering with deft diplomacy, subtle threats, and displays of dragonfire when needed. Syrax's wings cut through the sky as if slicing through doubt itself, a living emblem of her authority. And yet, even in triumph, tension simmered beneath the surface. Within the Red Keep, whispers of Aegon's ambitions grew louder. Secret councils plotted alliances against her. Nobles maneuvered for influence, and distant family members weighed their allegiances. The seeds of betrayal were planted early, nurtured by envy and fear, and Rhaenyra could sense them even before the words were spoken. Her dragons could burn cities, but the human heart was far more unpredictable and far more dangerous. The courts of Westeros watched and waited as Rhaenyra solidified her power. Her presence was a statement. She was no longer the princess who wandered Dragonstone's corridors, but a rising queen, shaping the course of history. She held audience in halls scented with wax and ink, made decisions that would ripple across kingdoms, and commanded respect through intellect, ambition, and the subtle threat of dragonfire. Every step forward was a declaration. The dragon's seed would not wait, the throne would not be silent, and the realm would bend or break before her. By the end of the year, the map of alliances had shifted. Minor lords pledged banners, knights swore oaths, and spies reported loyalties forged and broken. Dragons roared from their towers, a constant reminder that power was no longer theoretical. Rhaenyra's name echoed across the narrow sea, whispered in fear and admiration alike. The throne that had long seemed distant now loomed closer. Yet with every step forward, the shadow of conflict lengthened. The dance of dragons edged nearer with each passing day. Rhaenyra Targaryen had risen, but ambition was a flame that could not burn without consuming all in its path. In the darkened halls, under flickering candlelight and the watchful eyes of dragons, she felt both the exhilaration and the peril of power. Allies might turn to enemies. Love might become betrayal. And fire, once unleashed, could never be recalled. The Dragon Queen had awakened. Westeros would soon learn that ambition, when bound to dragons and prophecy, was not merely dangerous, it was unstoppable. The first clash came before dawn, the horizon ablaze with fire and steel. Dragons cut across the sky, their wings blotting out the stars, and the screams of men and horses echoed across the blood-soaked fields below. Westeros trembled beneath the fury of fire and ambition, and the dance of dragons had begun in earnest. Rhaenyra Targaryen rode atop Syrax, her eyes glinting like molten gold as she surveyed the battlefield. Flames licked the ramparts of Harrenhal, turning towers to embers, and the cries of the dying mingled with the thunderous beating of dragon wings. Here power was no longer measured in whispers or counsels, but in fire, blood, and the steel of swords. Her allies fought with desperation, yet betrayal lurked in every shadow. Lords who had sworn loyalty to her banners exchanged secret letters with her enemies, and knights who knelt before her one day drew blades the next. Rhaenyra's heart hardened as she learned the cruel calculus of war. Trust was a luxury reserved for fools, and ambition could turn even kin into killers. Across the field, Aegon's forces surged, his banner of black and gold rippling in the smoke-choked wind. Though the boy king seemed less than a threat, the cunning in his gaze told a story of latent ambition ready to erupt. The dragons were both terror and salvation. Syrax's roar echoed like rolling thunder, scorching battlements and scattering infantry. Other dragons, ridden by lords and Targaryen loyalists, joined the fray, creating a storm of wings, teeth, and fire that reduced castles to ash and leveled armies in moments. Yet the power of dragons did not prevent the agony of betrayal. News arrived that one of her trusted commanders had colluded with the enemy, turning the tide of a crucial skirmish. Rhaenyra clenched her jaw, fire blazing in her chest, not from Syrax but from fury and heartbreak. Trust, she realized, was always provisional, and loyalty could be bartered like coin. Amid the chaos, personal loss struck deep. Soldiers she had known since childhood lay broken in the mud, their banners torn and drenched in rain and blood. Her advisors whispered in fear, their faces pale beneath soot and ash. Even dragons faltered, their eyes wide with confusion as fire met fire. Rhaenyra witnessed the consequences of ambition unbridled. The flames that promised glory also devoured the innocent, and every victory came at the price of human agony. She clenched her fists atop Syrax's saddle, willing herself to endure, to command, and to survive. Court intrigue escalated alongside the battlefield. Letters arrived detailing treachery. Some lords had secretly pledged to Aegon, while others conspired to seize her dragons for themselves. In the candlelit chambers of Dragonstone, Rhaenyra pored over intelligence, deciphering plots woven in ink and blood. She discovered that one of her closest confidants, a lord sworn to her family for generations, had sold information that led to the death of hundreds. The betrayal cut deeper than any sword. Every alliance was now tested, every oath weighed, and the thin line between friend and foe blurred into a haze of suspicion. Rhaenyra confronted the duplicity of kin in moments of stark confrontation. Aegon's presence in the war was no longer a distant threat. He commanded armies with his mother's cunning and the ambition of a king. When their forces finally met near the ruins of Harrenhal, the tension between them crackled like lightning. Words were few, but glances and gestures spoke volumes. Each understood that destiny had placed them as rivals, and neither would yield. Dragons circled overhead, mirrors of their rider's wrath, and the land itself seemed to shiver in anticipation of the bloodshed to come. Yet even in the firestorm of battle, Rhaenyra found clarity. She realized that war was not merely the meeting of armies, but a contest of perception, fear, and manipulation. Messages delivered under the guise of diplomacy could turn tides. A single act of courage or cruelty could shift the balance. She ordered targeted strikes, careful demonstrations of dragonfire that would terrify yet preserve key allies. Her brilliance in strategy was tempered only by grief, the knowledge that no decision would leave her heart unscathed. The turning point arrived in the smoldering aftermath of the Battle of the Gullet. Dragons lay wounded, castles crumbled, and the field was littered with the bodies of the dead. Rhaenyra stood among the ruins, Syrax's wings folding slowly behind her, her gaze sweeping over the devastation wrought by both fire and treachery. A letter delivered by a trembling messenger revealed the ultimate betrayal. One of her most trusted lords had murdered his own kin to curry favor with Aegon, ensuring a temporary upper hand in the war. Rage, sorrow, and a cold, calculating resolve warred within her. The dance of dragons was no longer a contest of kingdoms. It had become a crucible in which loyalty, love, and blood were tested to their limits. In the skies above, dragons screamed in defiance, fire colliding with fire, wings thrashing against wind and storm. Below, soldiers fought as if their lives depended on it, because they did. The realm itself trembled under the weight of ambition and fury. Rhaenyra understood that the war would not be short. nor would it be merciful. Every choice carried consequences that rippled across kingdoms, cities, and generations. She hardened her heart, letting sorrow and fury fuel her strategy rather than paralyze her. The night descended over the battlefield, cold and suffused with smoke and ash. Fires flickered, casting long shadows over the broken land. Rhaenyra, atop Syrax, surveyed the cost of ambition. Lives lost, dragons wounded, alliances shattered. Yet in the darkness a spark of determination endured. She would not yield, for surrender would bring only ruin. Her enemies might betray, her kin might conspire. But the dragon blood within her burned with unyielding fire. As she looked to the horizon, the distant towers of King's Landing glimmered like a promise and a threat. The war was far from over. Betrayal had already claimed the innocent and scarred the loyal. Flames and blood had marked the land. But the final act of the Dance of Dragons had yet to be written. In the heart of Rhaenyra Targaryen, the fire of vengeance, ambition, and survival raged. A force that would shape Westeros in ways both magnificent and terrible. The Dance of Dragons was no longer a game. It was a war of destiny written in scales, steel, and blood. And for every betrayal that had been revealed, every castle consumed by fire, Rhaenyra understood one immutable truth. The throne would not be hers by chance, nor by mercy. It would be claimed with fire, with dragons, and with the unbreakable will of a queen forged in prophecy and ambition. The smoke of Harrenhal still clung to the horizon, when the grief began to descend upon Rhaenyra Targaryen like a winter storm. The battlefield had cooled, yet the echoes of screams and the scent of burning flesh lingered in every corridor of Dragonstone. Victory, if it could be called that, was hollow. Dragons had fallen, banners had been shredded, and men she had called allies now lay broken beneath the weight of ambition's cruel hand. The war had consumed more than cities. It had consumed innocence, hope, and the fragile bonds of family. Rhaenyra wandered the halls in silence, her mind a tempest of sorrow and calculation. Syrax had returned wounded, scales marred by arrow and sword, eyes dimmed by battle yet still fierce. The dragons had survived, yet the price was steep. The bodies of knights, friends, and servants littered the land like the remnants of a storm. Letters arrived in trembling hands bearing news of betrayals too bitter to ignore. Her uncle, a man sworn to loyalty, had struck against her forces to curry favor with Aegon. Even the blood of Targaryen kin had not spared her from treachery. The court grew restless. Whispered accusations spread like wildfire, and suspicion twisted every gesture. Ministers and advisors, once loyal, now questioned strategy, demanded favors, and plotted for advantage. Rhaenyra understood that the human heart was the most treacherous battlefield of all. Love, devotion, and friendship could turn on a single word, a glance, a promise broken. Trust became an impossible luxury, and yet she had no choice but to wield it carefully like a blade that could cut both ways. The losses were deeply personal. Sons and daughters of noble houses cherished dragons, and the innocent had perished in the flames and chaos of war. Rhaenyra's own children, the heirs of her line, were threatened by circumstance, their lives hanging precariously amidst shifting alliances and burning cities. Every death etched grief into her bones, yet she could not succumb entirely. The weight of the crown, though unseen, pressed against her chest with relentless force. Even sorrow had to be harnessed, transformed into the determination to endure, to lead, to survive. The Red Keep itself became a symbol of tragedy. Once a monument to power and grandeur, its halls were now haunted by memories of treachery and loss. Candlelight flickered across tapestries soaked with soot and shadow, each thread whispering stories of what had been taken. Lords argued over spoils, knights plotted revenge, and the people of King's Landing whispered rumors of dragons who could not be tamed. Rhaenyra observed it all with the measured gaze of one who understood that grief could not paralyze a queen. It could only steel her resolve. Even the dragons bore the mark of tragedy. Caraxes, Vermithor, and other companions of her line suffered wounds and scars that would never heal. Their roars now carried both defiance and lamentation, a mournful music of fire and fury. Rhaenyra stroked Syrax's scorched neck, feeling the creature's pain and her own mirrored in its gaze. Dragons were immortal in spirit, yet mortal in flesh. They were both weapons and mirrors, reflecting the cost of ambition back at her in scales and sorrow. The betrayals compounded the anguish. Lords who had sworn loyalty switched sides for fleeting advantage. Families who had promised support turned coat in moments of fear or greed. Even Aegon, once a brother in arms, had become a cunning adversary, his cunning rivaling her own. The lines between friend and foe had dissolved, leaving only survival, vengeance, and the faint flickering hope that the flames of destiny might one day favor her. Every decision now carried consequence. A choice made in haste could doom generations. Hesitation could invite ruin. In private moments, Rhaenyra allowed herself to weep, though never for long. Her grief was both private and public, a shadow she bore silently while presenting strength to the world. Candlelight reflected in her eyes as she contemplated the ruins of what had once been, a realm of alliances, a court of loyalty, a line of succession unbroken. Now, all that remained were ashes, scorched earth, and the echoing cries of those who had been lost to ambition's cruel hand. Yet even in the depths of sorrow, a fire burned within her. The loss of dragons, allies, and loved ones was grievous, yet she knew that survival demanded more than mourning. She began to forge strategies from tragedy, alliances from grief, and strength from despair. Every tear shed, every heartbreak endured sharpened her resolve. She was no longer merely a princess or queen in waiting. She had become the embodiment of the cost of power itself, a figure whose presence commanded both fear and awe, shaped by sorrow as much as by ambition. The landscape of Westeros reflected the weight of the dance of dragons. Cities lay in ruin, rivers ran red with blood, and forests smoldered from dragonfire. The people, weary and fearful, whispered of a queen whose ambition was both savior and scourge. Rhaenyra walked among them, observing their despair, their hope, their anger, and their loyalty. She understood that a ruler could not be judged solely by victories or titles. She would be measured by the endurance of her line, the survival of her dragons, and the permanence of her legacy, even amidst tragedy. The stormy nights brought memories of past counsel and warnings from her father and mother. "Power is never without cost," Viserys had said, voice heavy with caution. "And fire, once unleashed, may consume even those who wield it." Her mother's gentle warnings echoed as well. "The hearts of men are fragile. Tread carefully, even when you ride dragons into war." Now, as she watched the horizon burn with the last embers of battle, Rhaenyra understood fully the depth of their counsel. Loss was not merely an event. It was a shaping force, forging her into a queen who could endure, who could command, who could survive. As the chapter of tragedy closed, Rhaenyra stood atop Dragonstone's cliffs. Syrax coiled beside her, wings flicking against the wind. The sea roared beneath them, waves crashing like drums of destiny. The fires of battle had dimmed, yet the cost lingered, etched in every scar, every fallen banner, every life extinguished. Westeros had learned that the dance of dragons was no mere contest of armies. It was a trial of the heart, a crucible in which loyalty, love, and ambition were tested against fire and blood. And in the silent aftermath, as night swallowed the smoldering battlefield, Rhaenyra Targaryen realized the cruel truth. The throne could be claimed, but never without loss. Every victory would demand sacrifice. Every gain would carry shadows of betrayal. Her dragons still roared and her heart still burned, but she understood that the true war was only beginning, one of endurance, of vengeance, and of destiny itself. The smoke of war had finally begun to lift over Westeros. Castles once ablaze now stood in solemn ruin, their charred walls silent witnesses to the devastation wrought by dragons and ambition. Rivers ran black with ash, fields lay barren, and the land itself seemed to shiver under the weight of grief and survival. Rhaenyra Targaryen stood upon the cliffs of Dragonstone, the wind tearing at her hair, the cry of Syrax echoing across the sea. She had endured betrayal, loss, and fire, yet the pulse of destiny beat stronger within her than ever. The dance of dragons had carved scars across the realm, but it had also forged a queen tempered in tragedy, tempered in fire. The heirs who had survived watched her with a mixture of fear and reverence. Children of kings and queens, they bore the weight of lineage and expectation, the promise of continuity in a land scarred by blood. Rhaenyra taught them not only the language of dragons and politics, but also the unspoken lesson of survival. Power was earned through resilience, cunning, and the courage to bear loss without breaking. In their eyes, she glimpsed the future of the Targaryen line, a line that, though diminished in number, remained unbroken in spirit. Allies and adversaries alike had been tested, and the boundaries of loyalty were redrawn in the aftermath. Some lords who had betrayed were granted cautious pardon, their survival contingent on the mercy of a queen who understood the necessity of pragmatism. Others, irredeemable in their treachery, were extinguished, leaving a somber reminder that ambition unchecked could invite death. The court, once a nest of intrigue and whispers, now stood wary yet obedient, reshaped by the crucible of war and fire. The dragons themselves, wounded yet vigilant, roamed the skies and cliffs. Syrax, her constant companion, bore scars along wings and flanks, each mark a testament to battles fought and won, to victories won at terrible cost. Their presence reminded the realm that the Targaryens were creatures of both awe and fear, their fire the ultimate arbiter of power. Rhaenyra's connection with her dragons was no longer mere dominion. It was symbiosis, a living bond of loyalty, respect, and understanding, forged in the furnace of shared survival. Yet the greatest victory lay not in conquest or survival, but in legacy. Westeros had witnessed fire and blood, betrayal and loss, and in those trials, Rhaenyra's name became legend. Songs would be sung, stories would be whispered in the halls of castles and the cottages of peasants, of the dragon queen who rose through sorrow, commanded dragons, and endured when the world itself seemed poised to consume her. Her tale was one of power, yes, but also of endurance, a reminder that even amidst ruin, the flame of hope and legacy could endure. In the quiet moments atop the cliffs of Dragonstone, Rhaenyra reflected on the prophecy that had once guided and haunted her. Fire and blood had indeed consumed the throne, yet through that inferno a lineage persisted. The children she raised, the alliances she had tempered, and the dragons who still soared were living testaments to resilience. Destiny, once a shadow looming over her life, was now something she wielded, tempered by grief and strengthened by trial. The throne was never a seat of comfort. It was a crucible, and she had survived its fire. The seas stretched endlessly before her, dark and tempestuous, yet glimmering with the first hints of dawn. Westeros, though scarred, endured. The lords and ladies who remained were mindful now of the dragon queen who had survived betrayal, loss, and fire. Their whispers had changed from doubt to caution, from envy to wary respect. The realm had been reshaped not merely by war, but by the endurance of one woman who refused to yield. She was queen not by chance nor by mercy, but by the relentless force of will, foresight, and the courage to bear loss without surrender. Rhaenyra's eyes swept across the horizon, imagining the generations to come. Children would inherit not only her name, but the lessons carved in fire and blood. That ambition must be balanced with wisdom, that trust is fragile yet necessary, and that legacy is built not only in victory but in survival through tragedy. The ghosts of those lost still lingered in memory, yet they guided her as she contemplated the fragile, enduring line of her family. In every heartbeat, every wingbeat of Syrax overhead, the past and future intertwined, a living testament to endurance and destiny. As night fell, the last fires of rebellion extinguished, and the wind swept across stone battlements. Rhaenyra stood silent, contemplating both the cost and the reward of ambition. Westeros had learned the power of dragons, the peril of betrayal, and the strength of a queen forged by prophecy, tragedy, and determination. Her legacy was no longer simply hers. It was woven into the land, the people, and the dragons themselves, a living, breathing testament to fire and blood. And in that silence, as stars glimmered faintly above the cliffs and the distant seas whispered of the future, Rhaenyra Targaryen understood the immutable truth of her life. Power was a flame that could destroy, yet it could also endure, leaving behind light in the darkness, and a legacy remembered long after the dragons had flown from the skies. The dance of dragons had ended, but its echo would linger for generations. Westeros would remember the fire, the blood, the betrayal, and the courage. And above all, it would remember the queen who rose, scarred but unbroken, from the ashes of a world consumed by ambition.